Top story this week. Well, we're going to start with Continent of the Week. I'm going to draw the winning continent out of a hat from the world's leading 10 continents. And this week's winner is Asia. What a good continent to start with. Easily the most popular continent on Earth. What is it? 4.5 to 5 billion people. Can't be wrong. Anuvab, you have long been the Bugle's representative of the vast majority of humanity. And so, a few interesting stories, including that one of the things that's emerged from COP is that delegates have suggested that China and India should no longer be called developing countries, which was an official designation dating back to the 1992 UNFCCC. I can guess what the F, the C, the C, and the C stand for based on how international diplomacy works, but I'm not sure about the U and the N. It's the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. I was completely wrong. Anyway, how has this news been received in India?
So, this is the interesting thing is Indians love telling the world that they're a wealthy, developing nation. Except at COP, where they want money. When we show up at COP26, then it becomes like a Monty Python sketch where we want to outdo everybody and prove that we're poor. And what's happened at COP is a number of African nations. So this gentleman from Nigeria who's leading the Nigerian delegation, and his name is Mr. Balarabe Abbas Lawal. And he said that basically China and India are developing nations now. They no longer should be clubbed together with all the African nations and get aid from Western countries because they have pretty high GDPs now. And he said they should try and support us. They should also come and make some contribution financially, like the Western countries do, to the poorer countries to help climate change. At which Indian delegates started screaming, "We're very, very poor. We're very poor." Till someone said, "Is that a Louis Vuitton bag that you're holding?" So this is the thing. It's difficult, and which is why I have sent the Indian delegation. I personally have sent the Indian delegation some tips on how to appear poor when your GDP is growing at 7.5%. And what they need to do is to go back to the Monty Python sketch of the four Yorkshiremen, where they were trying to prove out to each other and how poor they were. Where one Yorkshireman said, "I'm so poor that we used to have a cup of tea without milk or sugar." And someone else said, "A cup would have been a luxury. We used to put our tea in a newspaper." And someone else said, "We used to suck on a piece of cloth." So I think that, double standards is really the best way to play it at COP26.
Only double. I mean, usually we're looking at treble or quadruple standards at COP conferences. So.
Is the fifth Yorkshireman an Indian who goes, "Tea? Where did you think they took the tea from?"
Exactly. How do you think that man in Darjeeling is poor? They took his tea, and now he has to live in a house with holes in the roof. He probably doesn't even have a house. He probably lives in a corridor. It's endless.
COP29 climate talks, more like climate cops policing language. Am I right, Andy? I think this is the woke agenda. Next time, if we can't call developing nations anymore, next thing they'll claim that not all nation states are women who can be drawn in satirical cartoons with their tits out. Actually, I think it's a reasonable request because these designations were given to various countries back in 1993. They're slightly out of date. I feel like the old designations ought to be resignated and then do new designations nated to the relevant nations. But basically, the argument is China and India are developing nations. They're just not developing nations. They're doing well for themselves. They're at about a 7 on the scale of up and up to up, if 1 is up and 10 is up. So it's not a meaningless thing, because if you're classified as the reason it's relevant is if you're classified as a developing country, it means you have no formal obligation to cut your greenhouse gas emissions or to provide financial help to poorer countries. And it means they're also eligible to receive climate aid, which India does, but China does not, which is nice to know it has some standards. It's like, you know how Darth Vader is technically eligible to apply for disability payments, but he draws a line somewhere. He's
very
doing
good.
okay for
Exactly.
himself.
Alice is absolutely right. I mean, the smog over Beijing doesn't come for free. There's a cost to it. Someone has to be paying for it. So I think what India needs to do in COP29 is to send a delegation dressed like the cast of Slumdog Millionaire. There are a number of ways that you can't show up in posh suits with Louis Vuitton and Armani and then want money to put into your climate change thing. You got to dress for the part. So if you want money from COP26, dress up like Slumdog Millionaire, show up, not like the quiz master of Slumdog Millionaire. He was quite well dressed. So like the rest, and then you can demand some money.
I guess all countries are developing in some way or another. It's just some are developing in the same manner that an illness develops. For example, the USA, but arguably the country that is developing fastest right now. Also, based on its Belt and Road program, through which China is investing in over 150 nations or international organizations. China is not a developing country; it is developing countries. So that's a slight semantic difference. And like we said, these classifications date back to 1992, and things have changed. For example, in 1992, I was a teenager. That's how fucking long ago it was. The internet was basically two guys with yogurt pots and string describing naked women to each other. Hope was going through a little bit of a late 20th century boom. Nuance was still legal. I mean, this is a long, long time ago. This is longer ago from now than from the beginning of the First World War to the end of the Second World War. That is a big old chunk of history. It's almost as long as from the first Christmas to the first Easter, which is really when things started going wrong, to be honest. So, I mean, it does seem a bit ridiculous to still be using those classifications. India's GDP, Anuvab, up by over 1,200% in that time, from around 290 billion to 3.5 trillion. The GDP per capita up by 800%. Those billionaires are doing some seriously heavy lifting on that one, to be fair, but still significant. Also, a huge gap between India's GDP per capita, about $2,800, and America's at $35,000. So, my question for you, Anuvab, and I know you like to come on the Bugle with questions for me, should a nation that has over 300 billionaires, does it need this kind of financial help that COP conferences give, or should it be sorting out its finances a little better?
Well, Andy, if there's free money going and all it takes is a nice looking PowerPoint with photos of poor people, why not? Why not? I mean, if all it takes is to go into a Holiday Inn in Brazil, I think it's Brazil, right? And give a presentation and get money, why not? And tell me this, Andy, if India's grown so much and if there's so many rich people, why am I in a storeroom right now? Why is none of this trickle down to me? I'm in a storeroom staring at a broken lamp. Nothing's changed from 1994 for me. And I just want to know that I think among the things the 300 Indian billionaires are not doing, is I think one of the basic things they're not doing is giving the money to the rest of the country. That's probably how they are billionaires. I think they're spending it on really efficient things like aeroplanes and fast cars, which leaves the rest of the country to have to ask for carbon credits.
I mean, you might not be a billionaire yet, but I mean, let's look at the trend in India, Anuvab. There are 3 times more billionaires in India than 10 years ago, which means that if things keep going at the current rate, if I've done my maths correctly, which is quite a big if, in just 190 to 200 years, every single person in India will be a billionaire. So you've not got that long to wait until, just by the sheer force of statistics, you also are a billionaire. And also in terms of developing countries and the model that developed countries set, the fact that India has these billionaires but still a huge amount of poverty shows how well we have taught the developing world to repeat our economic mistakes and idiocies. So you're welcome. You are welcome.